Right, well, I would do face cam, but it just seemed more appropriate not to for this video. So I went to the cinema with my mum and my stepdad to go and see Morbius. I saw the reviews and I didn't think really, it'll be like Suicide Squad again where everyone's saying it's crap when it isn't, but you know. And I sat there, watched it, and it was fucking terrible. This isn't one of those videos where I'm just going to sit here and go, oh, it was terrible, terrible. I'm not just going to sit there and go, oh, well, this is bad and I want views. This is going to be one of those videos where I'm actually going to critique the story and tell you what could have been changed and, some other stuff that's actually, like, insightful and not just, like, don't go and see the film because it's shit. This is, like, stuff that if you do decide you want to go and see it, that, like, keep this in mind. These are the things that they should have done. So, there will be spoilers. But I guess you know that now, so yeah, let's get into it. So the story starts off, and it kind of opens a bit obscure, because you don't really know what's going on, but Dr. Morbius, played by Jared Leto, or Leto, I don't know, I'm just going to call him Jared, because I don't know how you pronounce his last name. Don't at me, just don't know, so yeah. It's a place where Jurassic Park's set. I can't remember, it's Costa Rica, that's it. He's in Costa Rica, and he goes there with a team of scientists and a few mercenaries, and they're like, oh, what you think you're doing, son? And he's like, well, I've got this wacky experiment I want to conduct with bats. They never bring up why. It's just, he does. And it's the bit from the trailer where he sticks his hand on the rail and, like, all the bats fly at him and blah, blah, blah. In the trailer, he does this scream thing, but in the film, he just cuts. And then it has this horrible title sequence where it's, like, Morbius, but it's, like, Hotline Miami, pink and blue. So I was like, alright then, okay, whatever. Didn't really bother me that much. But, it was just something to point out. So anyway, it cuts to Morbius as a kid, and he is a cunt. He's got this like really bad sort of blood disease, and he's really terminally ill, and he is in this hospital, and this other kid comes in, and he's like, oh, hi Milo, and he's like, what do you call me? And he's like, Milo, and he's like, the kid's like, you what, mate? Morbius is like, oh, well, every kid who comes here basically dies, and I just call him Milo because, you're pretty much gonna fucking die here. And then the kid has like a seizure and then collapses, and then it turns out his machine has malfunctioned or something, and Morbius, being the absolute boy genius he is, like Dexter's Laboratory, takes the fuse out and puts a spring in, which is quite clever, to be honest. It's like, it's not genius, but anyone could do that. I would know how to do that, because you do that in bloody Dying Light 2. So, Anyway, the head doctor, who was the bloke from Resident Evil Apocalypse, I can't remember his name, he's in Chernobyl, I think, as well. He is like, oh, Morbius, you're a genius, you, son. Like, we should take you to Harvard and, get your dick wet and stuff. And he's like, I fixed the fucking spring in a machine. So it cuts to a few years later, and Morbius is like a renowned doctor. He gets awards and all sorts because he's a genius. It's a bit like Doctor Strange, except for Doctor Strange is like he's self-aware that he's a dick, whereas Morbius is just a dick because he gets given this award for creating this new type of blood, and it's like a synthetic sort of blood. It's kind of like the blood you see in Cyberpunk when you shoot a maelstrom and the red explodes, but it's like a light bluish colour. It looks like the blue milk from Star Wars. So anyway, he's like, I don't want an award, fuck you. And I was like, well, why'd you bother coming then? And then his best mate, who was also sort of his romantic interest, it's kind of forced later on, but I'll get into that. She's like, I can't believe you turned down the award. And he's like, I can. It turns out that obviously the kid Milo, which wasn't called Milo at all, his real name is Lucius, yet he still calls him Milo, which is a bit fucked up, but whatever. He comes to Morbius, and he's like, oh, what do you want this time? Because apparently Lucius has a shitload of money. He's basically the Jeff Bezos of the Morbius world. Never explains where he gets the money from, so he just has all this money. You'd think even though Morbius has got all these awards and, Nobel Prizes and all sorts of things, that he'd be paid a shitload, because apparently he's done all this medical breakthrough work and, all the sponsors and all the other things that he'd get from all of that. No, he has no money apparently. So anyway, he's got this genius idea that, like, if he goes to the Pacific Ocean, doesn't say why, he just wants to go there specifically, to splice bat DNA with human DNA, because bats have a sort of part of their body where they can drink expired blood, but their gland inside of them can change it to normal blood. So it's like healthy to consume, if you know what I mean. His theory is that if he does that with his own body, that the blood will change back to normal in his own body, if you know what I mean. It seems solid enough, the idea. Now, I don't think that's bad on paper. The execution is what's bad. It wouldn't work in real life. I'm not a scientist, but it wouldn't work. I think the most your body would do is reject it, and you'd probably be ill for quite a bit, or depending on how bad it affects you, you could be terminally ill. But he's already terminally ill, so what's the worst that could happen? And basically, right after there, he goes to the Pacific Ocean. He tests it on himself. He has the injection in his back of this spliced DNA. It literally looks like bio-oil, but whatever. He goes feral, his face starts changing, and he does the whole thing from the trailer where he turns around and looks at the camera. He kills all of the crew, but one of the crew members pushes his girlfriend into this. I don't know what it was. I can't really remember, but it was like a big machine. It looked like one of those things that reads your brain, the MRI scan things. And she gets knocked out and she's concussed. So yeah. So she doesn't know what happened. And Morbius, after realizing he's killed everyone, he calls in an emergency like evac. So he like rings like the Coast Guard and stuff. He doesn't ring them, not like on a mobile phone. That would be weird. Yeah, can I have a large pizza, please? Yeah, no. He just tells them, oh yeah, like everyone's dead. Like send back up, blah blah blah. And do you know, like in Superbad way, he's like, there's blood everywhere, like that, and he hangs up. It's like that. But yeah, so he jumps off the boat, and then apparently manages to swim all the way back to Manhattan. I don't know. They never really said where he was in America. I don't think he did anyway. But wherever he is, he's back there now. But instead of doing the whole, do you know, like in films like, I don't know, like The Fly, instead of doing that where he like slowly becomes like a vampire and he slowly sort of develops, it jumps right into it. But the fact, and this is what I'm going to point out, the fact that when this happens, Morbius only sliced bat DNA with human DNA. There was no other element or no other particle or no other, you know, 115 element or something from zombies that was mixed into the batch that made him like this. It was direct bat and human DNA. So he just has powers now. The girlfriend is like in that meme where it's like, oh, girls get a cough, they're fine, boys get a cough, and it's the bloke hooked up to the machine. She's literally attached to a machine on breathing support after having like a concussion. But it wasn't like a, oh, this is a life-threatening concussion. This is like a, boof, oh, I've been knocked out concussion. Morbius is in his lab because he's got like a lab underneath the hospital, and he's like, oh, I wonder what I can do now. So he tests all his abilities, and he can do sonar, he can like do all this magical shit, and you're like, oh, cool. He realizes that he needs to have blood because he starts like having like seizures and stuff. So he takes some of the synthetic blood he makes, and he's like, oh yeah, mint, and then he's fine. And he counts how long it takes every time, so it's like from like, it goes from 6 hours to 4 minutes 20. You know, 4 minutes 20, 4 hours 20. What the fuck? Lucius appears with his crutches and stuff, and he's like, hey, what you doing, cunt? Like, what the fuck was that? And he's like, oh, nothing. And there's like 3 vials or whatever in the room. He's like, oh, the fucking DWP gonna take me money away if you don't give us the fucking cure. And he's like, ah, nah, son, you're gonna have to go without benefits, I'm afraid. So Morbius won't give Lucian the cure, because the cure obviously isn't a cure, it's more of a curse, as he says in the film, so I'm quoting the film for that. So Lucius is like, alright then, okay, and Morbius is like, fuck off then, get out of my office, and then he leaves. It cuts to like night time, and one of the doctors is like seeing to a patient, and then she's walking down the corridor, but the lighting system in the hospital is wank. It's like, it lights up 1 square at a time, so when she's walking it only lights up like a certain amount of bits in the corridor. And anyway, it runs the impression that Morbius attacked the doctor and killed her, and then he wakes up in this other room, and he's like, oh shit, I passed out. So, the police are looking for Morbius, and then Morbius gets his crutches and pretends he's disabled and tries to walk out the entrance, and these 2 police officers are like, here, you don't look disabled, and he's, oh fuck, and then like, he's like, DWP, you're on to me, and then he sprints out the door, and then he goes to go up the rooftop, and then just before he like, tries to jump to the next building, something's like pushing him, and he doesn't know what it is. It's like a force that's pushing him, and then he stops himself, and then the police just like, right, hands up, like, you know, ponytail, and he's like, okay. It's like that scene in the Superman film where you know, Superman sat there with handcuffs, and you think he's Superman. Like, they're not kryptonite handcuffs, they're just normal handcuffs. You could just snap them, snap the guy's neck, and walk out. But anyway, they think they can hold him, and then he explains that, like, he doesn't know what's going on, and he doesn't know who's committing the murders, and he doesn't know anything. The only thing is that he knows is he needs to eat, because he's hungry, he needs blood. And they're like, nah, you can do one. So Lucian comes in, and he's like, "Hiya, son," like that, and he's like, "Oh, hi," and he's like, "I brought you some blood," and he like takes out his jacket and flings it on the table. I don't know how he got it through, but he did. But like, you know, you don't search a disabled guy, do you, really? Because he's a bit fucked, so he must have just snuck it in up his arse or something, I don't know. He's not in like a police station, he's in an actual prison. So the trial must have been really quick. Yeah, he's basically saying like, "Oh, anything you need, you know, I'm here for you, blah blah blah." And then Lucian walks out, but he leaves his cane, because he brought a cane in with him, and you're like, "Oh." And then Morbius realizes that, well, he's left his cane, he's walked out, and then it's obviously, and then the big reveal, like, oh, Lucian was the guy who killed him in the corridor, and you're like, ah, right. And then he's walking, he basically becomes Tobey Maguire in Spider-Man 3, he does the whole finger-snapping thing, and, like, walking and blah, 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 and you're like, oh, cool. Matt Smith does an amazing job, and Jared does an amazing job as well in the film, that's what I was going to say. Both of them are doing an amazing job, it's just the story that's shit. And then he does the whole vampire thing, the trope where they, like, pick up girls in a bar or whatever. He attempts to do this, and then her boyfriend or owner, I guess, because he acts like he is, because he's a dick, is like, "Ah, nah, son, this is my bitch, fuck off." And he's like, right then. Lucius is like really annoyed by the fact that, like, obviously he couldn't pick up this girl, and fair enough. He sits on a rooftop and then waits for the bloke to come out with his mates, and then he kills him and his mates, but the camera records him doing that, and then you're like, oh, right, now I know that obviously it's not Lucius, sorry, it's not Morbius, it's Lucius who's doing all this shit. And you're like, right. Morbius breaks out of prison, and then he goes to confront him, because he's like, obviously, I know that you're not you anymore, you're a vampire or whatever. And he's like, ah, but we're like superhumans, like, we can do whatever we want, like, you know, the typical, I'm your friend, but now I'm the villain sort of thing, and like, you're either with me or against me, Obi-Wan Anakin sort of thing. And they have a big scrap, and it's in the subway, and the police are all more interested in catching Morbius than they are Lucian, because obviously Morbius is just broken out of prison. And they're all shooting Morbius, even though Lucian is like full vampire, with the fangs in the face and everything, like killing everyone. And there's no security or cameras, apparently, in this subway. This subway also looks like it's in London, it doesn't look like it's in America. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like the London Underground, and my mum said the exact same thing, that it looks like the London Underground. It doesn't look like a typical New York subway. Yeah, so they're fighting and stuff. Lucian and Morbius are kicking the shit out of each other. And then Lucian's like, "You can't escape me forever, blah blah blah." And then Morbius is like on the tracks, and Lucian's like, "Ah, we'll see you then." And then the trains come in, and then Morbius feels that feeling that he got on the roof, of something pushing him, and then he realises that he can fly, so he just flies away and then escapes. And then Lucian goes to Morbius's sort of girlfriend's house, and he's like, "Oh, have you seen him anywhere?" And she's like, "No, I haven't." Morbius is like, he's in the area, I think, but she's like, "Oh, I haven't seen him." And he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna ask you again, and I want you to tell me the truth this time." So she like lowers her heart rate, because she knows that he can hear her heart rate. It doesn't explain how she knows, she just knows. And then he's like, "Oh," and then it cuts to like a scene right after that where they're on the rooftop, Morbius and her, and like they're snogging, and then Lucian stood like 2 buildings across from them, looking at them directly, and it's like that. It's like the meme from 2.5 Men, where they're like, "Oh, I swear we're forgetting something," and they've left the kid at the football practice thing, or basketball, or whatever it was. Lucian's like, "Oh, well, I want Morbius to be more like me, and he needs to be like me, otherwise nothing," because they don't explain it. He just, for some reason, wants him to be like him, and wants him to eat people and not have the synthetic blood, but whatever. Lucian kills the head doctor, because for some reason, from the old place that they were staying at as kids. If you remember that bit, then yeah. The doctor hasn't aged a day, and it's been like 20 years, so he should have aged significantly, because he was in his 40s by the looks of things then, but he doesn't age, his hair doesn't change colour or anything, he looks exactly the same. It's a bit weird, but whatever. And Morbius is like, "Oh no," so he goes to the house, and Morbius can smell blood, and the guy's had his stomach slashed open, and he's bleeding, but Morbius doesn't react to him gushing with blood. So he's like, oh. But, that's important, what I've just said there. The fact he didn't react, because I'll get into that. So then, Morbius is pissed off, and he's like, right, I have to kill Lucius, because he's a cunt. And he's killing people now for the sake of killing people. Morbius like goes out looking for him, and then Lucius is like holding Morbius's girlfriend hostage, sort of girlfriend hostage, and then he stabs her in the throat with his nail and kills her. And then Morbius is like, I can smell the blood, so he just drinks her blood, and then she dies. And then them two fight, and the fight is so incoherent and hard to actually watch. It's like when you first watch one of the Daniel Craig James Bond films when they first came out, where the action was really fast and it didn't really show you much. You kind of had to work it out yourself, except for you couldn't really work it out because you couldn't even see what was happening. So they went from fighting on the rooftops to fighting on the street for a bit, and then they ended up going through a construction site somehow, and then they ended up going like 50 feet underground to Dr. Connor's lab, that kind of like underground, even though they don't go there, I'm just saying, it's like the equivalent. And you're like, okay. And then Morbius has made this thing where it's like, oh, it can kill humans, but it's also like lethal to bats or whatever. So it's like, either way, it's gonna kill Lucius either way. That's his theory. So he injects Lucius with that, and he's like, we could have been so much more together, and blah blah blah. And Morbius is like, nigga, like, what is your problem? Like, why have you been doing this whole time? This isn't even you. This is like some really stupid bend you're on at the moment, right? And the moment you sober up, you're gonna feel like a tit. And then obviously he's dead, so it's like, oh yeah. And then it cuts to like Morbius's girlfriend on the roof, and then she wakes up and she's a vampire. And then it doesn't explain how or why, and then does this like weird camera shot of Morbius, and then the film just ends, and you're like, eh. So it kind of annoyed me because I didn't really know what was going on, but like my theory was that before Lucius killed Morbius's girlfriend, I keep calling her that, I can't remember her name, and I can't be bothered googling it because it's just not worth the effort. Anyway, he probably gave her the same thing that Morbius and Lucius have had to turn them into vampires. So, because everyone who's been bitten or had the blood drained or whatever never became a vampire, and my mum was like, oh, because they had their blood drained. I was like, but not everyone did. That's the thing. Because that means that the Doctor would come back as a vampire and blah blah blah, and there's all this other stuff, and no. What I think this film is lacking is just story points, really, because there's a lot of things that happen that don't get explained, like why Matt Smith's character went completely mental. It was vague, but not really explained well enough. How bat DNA and human DNA could possibly give you vampire powers like what you see in the film. So, because there wasn't anything, like I said, there wasn't anything that mixed with his DNA besides just the bat DNA, so whatever. How his girlfriend came back, because they weren't very clear on how that happened. The problem with a lot of these films is that they feel like they need a villain. And Matt Smith didn't have to be the villain. He could have been a side antagonist or whatever, but he didn't really need to be the villain itself, because it doesn't really need to be like that. A lot of films seem to cower away from the whole I'm my worst enemy sort of trope with the characters, because Morbius is a vampire and he needs to feed, or he needs blood. What they could have done, instead of having an actual villain, an origin film of him struggling to deal with, the bloodlust and everything, how he's going to manage, keeping it in check. The Incredible Hulk tried to do that with Edward Norton, where he tried to keep his anger under control for certain situations, and when he needed to get angry, he did. They could have done something like that. Like the Mercenaries, they could have played a way bigger part in it. They could have been blackmailing Morbius, and him becoming a vampire is like, that's how he deals with it. And then the police come after him, and then obviously he regrets what he's done. And then maybe he actually has to work with the police because there's another vampire out there or whatever, which could have been Matt Smith because he could have found it. And Matt Smith isn't bad, he's just lost because obviously he doesn't know how to control the hunger, and that's it. And then it could have ended with them, like, basically turning their back on everything, and them two sort of becoming like, right, well, we need to like live away from everyone, and we need to like figure out how we're going to control our hunger. and that could have been perfect for a sequel. Like, it's open-ended as well. It's not like massively expanded, or it's like, oh well, there's gonna be another film, but we don't know if there is. So I don't know, I just felt like explaining it all first and then giving my thoughts made more sense, because if I just told you and you didn't really watch the film, you wouldn't understand. I think Sony really needs to just lay off making villain films for now. Well, I say villain films, anti-hero films, because they just don't know what they're doing. They're hiring people who made the fucking Power Rangers film, and like, I don't even get me started on that. Anyway, if you did enjoy the video, please leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new. I think this is the second video I've done where I haven't showed my face, but I don't know, I just felt like it's more about the film than me, so yeah. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. See you guys.